Hello and welcome back to the Not the Old Firm YouTube channel. My name is Ben Banks, back for a special discussion this time around with two representatives of two SPFL clubs to chat about the issues that have affected us all in Scottish football as a result of the COVID-19 global pandemic. Spoke with representatives from Clyde and Stenhousemuir, and we thank them greatly for their time in an expansive episode where everything pretty much you could hope is covered. Talk about the lack of finances from fans, different elements of the grounds that have been affected, social distancing, youth football, mental health. All topics are discussed in great detail in this video. Please do remember to like and subscribe to our channel. It would mean a lot. We're hoping to do more of these type of discussions in depth throughout the season and when big talking points like this come up. So we hope you do enjoy our first real introductory taster to that. Guys, thanks for joining me tonight. Can just start for anybody that's watching this, can you introduce yourself? Start with you, Ian.
Yep, my name is Iain McMenemy. I'm chairman of Stenhousemuir Football Club.
And David?
Hi, I'm David MacPherson. I'm medical director at Clyde Football Club, and I'm also the COVID officer, so trying to look after everything and keep it biosecure.
Well, that sounds a lot of fun, that role, to be fair, I can imagine.
Absolutely marvellous.
No, obviously going to be speaking tonight about the lack of fans returning. I think the test events happened in the Premiership. It's been bounced back to the 5th of October, now it's been bounced back to an indeterminate date. Just first of all, for going into the bits and pieces, of what are your sort of own personal thoughts on the issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy to kick off. I think we all probably were concerned over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks, maybe even, as we saw the figures start to change a little bit and seemed to be a little bit more prevalence of the virus coming back. And I think we were all concerned with the way it was heading, but at the same time, it didn't seem to be that there was issues in the outdoor setting. It seemed to be that they were continually pressing that the problem was indoor events, and particularly, people gathering in house parties and kind of pubs and sort of settings, I suppose, in that sense. But so I think we all thought that the test events would be the prelude to getting fans back in. So even though we kind of expected, that it was always a possibility, it's certainly, to me, it was a bit of a hammer blow when they did announce that there was going to be no more test events, and it's when the UK government said treat this as 6 months rather than 3 weeks that they said in government. It just kind of gives us a bit of an insight maybe into where things are. So it was a bit of a blow, but I don't think the fight is over, because I think they just need to maybe have a think about the different environments between small venues, larger venues, smaller clubs, larger clubs. Maybe need to start looking at different groups in different ways. So we certainly, I think, in my mind, want to keep going and keep pushing to see if we can maybe get fans in sooner rather than later.
David, you've got your own personal thoughts on it?
Well, I should confess straight away that I was at university with Professor Jason Leach. He was in my year at uni, so I know Jason, and he's doing a super job. I don't envy him. I think that the powers that be have a really tough time just now, and most pandemics have had a second wave. So although we were all disappointed to see the numbers rise in the last few weeks, I don't think many people were really surprised as we go into autumn and winter. My big concern is that once normal winter viruses strike, we're going to get an awful lot of false positives. We're going to get a lot of people isolating because it's a maybe, and let alone getting fans back into clubs. I think that will really affect clubs like Stenhousemuir and Clyde, Championship, First, Second Division, because most of our players are part-time. They're mixing in work bubbles as well as football bubbles, and they cannot be isolated to the same level as the Premiership. So as for fans, we've got an SFA inspection this week. Broadwood is probably as capable as any stadium to be biosecure. We had a 4-team tournament at the weekend, both Saturday and Sunday. and we managed to isolate 4 teams completely separately, apart from on the pitch, and then obviously had a separate bubble for the referees and officials. So it's possible to do the game part, and in terms of getting the fans back in, we've marked out the stadium. We've looked at different models of seating, where we know that people come to football with their friends. So we've actually looked at the stadium's capacity in terms of sitting people in 2s or 3s or 4s, and it's quite possible to do and mark it off. Done some training with some of the webinars online regarding looking at the sort of stadium paperwork, the Sports Ground Safety Authority, their green guide, and its sort of changes that have been put in for the COVID pandemic. So between the owners of Broadwood, which at the moment is North Lanarkshire Leisure, and the club, and we share the stadium with Cumbernauld Colts, and a number of other bodies use it over different times. I think we're quite confident we can do it securely, and I think the big problem is what's going on out there in the big wide world and how that's going to impact us.
Yeah, so how much because the Premiership has obviously kicked off and has been going for a few weeks now, how much can you guys take from them? Because even though it's still the same game of football on the park, off it, there's going to be some difference and challenges, I can assume, for guys part-time football in League 2, League 1.
I don't think there's a huge amount we can take, and that we've thus far, I think clubs have really went their own path. Each facility is different, so we've had to look at how we get returned to training and how we get a return to play in place, and it has to be specific to your own facility and your own clubs. There hasn't been a lot that we could take from them in that sense. I think perhaps the key thing has been the test events that the Word managed to hold before they closed down again. Those test events, I think, in terms of getting people to games and how clubs managed that, I believe was quite successful. So it has proven the case for a limited number. And as David said, that I think each club is able to make an assessment for themselves as to what they need to do to be secure. And so if we're talking about the kind of numbers that came in, even as I say 300, even if that came in for us, for example, that would be a big way on the way to get some revenue back in. If you're getting a crowd that's below 1,000, every week, then if you're getting 300, 500, 600 in, then that's making a good bit of progress towards what you would normally get in. Then perhaps with some pay-per-view or something like that, you could make up a little bit of the rest. Now, you're not going to make everything up because you've got everything else that happens on match days in terms of your hospitality guests, and you've got your 50-50s. If you've got a bar in your facility, that can be going as well. So there's all these other ways that clubs monetize match days. So it's never going to get everything back in, but any revenue coming in would be very useful right now.
And I suppose that with fans returning, there's obvious health risks, and I'm assuming these people aren't making these decisions lightly. But David, perhaps you're better to speak on that. Whilst these decisions are frustrating for clubs that they can't get fans in, can you have a better scientific understanding of why? Well,
we've looked very closely at the test matches. The 2 that were done in the Premier League. We also looked at the rugby example through in Murrayfield. And we work with Group 4 security at the stadium, and we have a COVID meeting once a week where we get all the sort of stakeholders and all the people that are involved together, and Group 4 come to that every week. So we've had updates from the rugby and how successful that was. They discussed with us the difficulties in terms of what went well and what was room for improvement. And football fans are not the same as rugby fans, so there will be some differences. And 300 people, as Iain said, 300 people is great for the likes of Clyde. You know, that number 500. You know, we can manage that at our stadium capacity of 8,800. You know, dotted around the stadium. We could have our normal attendance. You know, unless we're playing one of our sort of bigger rivals, we could accommodate that without any problem safely. I think that the scientific issues are getting people in and out safely. You know, I think we can manage the seating pretty safe. And in terms of how people walk past other people to their seats, because obviously that's an issue. You know, you can separate people when they're sitting down, but safely apart. Recommendation was that they just are back to back. So all of that was fine. The issues really are around things like toilets, kiosks, you know, anywhere where you're going to get congregation of people. And, you know, obviously that can be managed outside the stadium in terms of social distancing, queuing up. The end of the game we felt could be managed by asking people to leave in sections. So instead of the normal protocol of, you know, end of the game and everybody leaves at the same time, obviously you couldn't do that because you would just break all the social distancing rules. So, you know, there are ways to manage these things. And I think that, you know, I was very hopeful that Broadwood might be used as a test centre, because I really feel that with the facilities we had, we could do that. And at some point in the discussions in the past, there were talks about hubs being used for games, i.e., you know, certain stadium being identified as being quite capable of holding multiple matches and actually holding, you know, back-to-back matches over a weekend, not, you know, getting away from the idea of us all starting at the same time on a Saturday at 3 o'clock. And I think if you have those facilities, then that might be something that, you know, for the powers that be to look at. But as I say, going back to your question, I think it's all about the influx and leaving and the problems with toilets, especially because, you know, you can stop catering. That's, you know, that's not going to kill the game. But, you know, if somebody needs a toilet, how do you securely clean it down afterwards? How do you manage, you know, people queuing up? And you obviously, you know, it's unrealistic not to be able to provide those facilities.
Have you guys been in stadiums at all, Premiership-wise, so far this season?
No. I think the numbers are so tightly controlled. I think they have a bit more leeway in some of the Premiership clubs on the numbers, because they don't take up all the numbers in terms of the media and broadcasters. You can have that usually requires a significant number of people, and they're not there. But no, I think it's been so tightly controlled, the numbers, that we've not had the chance to go in and see. But we have been holding our pre-season games, and as David said, there was the tournament as well at the weekend there, and we've held I think 3 pre-season matches now at Ochilview. So we've had the other visiting clubs arriving, the match officials coming. We had to control obviously all the access and entry and the temperature checks for people in their cars or at the edge of the facility, the one-way system as to how they get in and out. We have the visiting team across the opposite side in a pavilion that we have over there as well, which has 4 separate changing rooms in there and separate shower units. It also has a large officials changing room in there, so 5 in total in that one. And we're using the 2 changing rooms in our main stand for the home team, plus an additional room as well, and the officials room. So we're able to control, you know, the distancing of people in the dressing rooms, so there can be 2 metres apart in all the changing facilities. How you use the showers is laid down by Scottish FA and by the guidance. I say it's all one-way systems as to what way you go out for match warm-up, and what way you come back in, which way you go out at the start of the game, which way you come back in at half-time, and how you leave, and all these things are laid out quite clearly. And then myself and others who are able to go and sit in the stands spread out. Again, that's quite well controlled. We're 1 every 5 seats we're sitting in, nobody in the row behind you, and then diagonally spaced after that. So that's all laid out in the green guide that David mentioned. So we can absolutely make sure we've got all these things in place, and we've been doing it now for a number of weeks. even prior to that, because we've got such a big community programme and we've got some of the kids' football back first, we've really had a good number of months now where we've been, managing a COVID-safe environment and ensuring that the youngsters who are coming to take part in the programmes are all getting temperature checked as well in the same way, and parents are doing drop-offs at the edge of the facility, and we're managing them being socially distanced, and where the youngsters wait for their seats, and they're allocated certain colours to use for certain toilet facilities and all these things. So we've already got quite a lot in place already. We're already doing it, if you like. So I don't think transferring, the hundreds of youngsters that we get coming through our gates to take part in programmes during the week and at weekends, transferring that over to supporters coming in, I don't think would be a huge step forward for us. So I think we're actually in a good place. We're ready to go with it. We just need to perhaps talk a bit more to government and make sure that they don't think of us all as facilities where you're having to manage 45,000 people coming in public transport and all wanting to use toilet facilities and queuing at turnstiles, and just the sea of people that you'll get at a game at Hibs or Hearts or Rangers, Celtic, Aberdeen, wherever it might be. Just a bit of realisation that's not what we're all about. And that's not to say that I wouldn't want to see, crowds in for Premiership clubs at a higher level, if that can be managed as well. But I think one needs to set out for the different levels of the game what could be achieved and maybe build up slowly so that we get to the point that we're comfortable with, and then Championship or Premiership clubs can build on that and get to a number that they're comfortable with. So I think we'd like to get on that journey with the government and with the health advisors, just to let them see that we are actually well prepared for this and we can do it.
Because I've been fortunate enough sort of at youth level to have played at both Ochilview and Broadwood, and you can't really, I've been in the changing rooms and you come into the stadium, I mean Ochilview especially, you go in the corridors and it's so tight in there, whereas Broadwood's perhaps a bit newer with the North Lanarkshire Council, but at the same time it's very hard to picture these grounds like away, like the home team having to sit 2 metres apart. You can almost picture it at like Premiership level because things are perhaps just that wee bit higher level, but at League 2, League 1 level especially, it must be extremely difficult.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the Premiership players, I'm fortunate enough to know a few as patients. And it's interesting, I've seen them since the start of the season. And, it's interesting, their whole routine is about being tested all the time and staying in their bubbles, and whereas our lads come in and they've been at work all day, and they've got their sort of normal routine, and then trying to say to them to sit spaced out in the in the stand, when you're then going into a changing room, or you're then on a pitch and you're not you're breaching those social guidance rules. I think it's almost harder for them to sort of get it into their sort of normal that's how they've to behave. And I think that's why the guidance was good in terms of education. And being honest, we've had 8 matches now that we've been involved in, and there's been some issues that we've learned from. It's all been constructive, and I think that's what's been good about it, is that the issue with COVID is you cannot get rid of the risk. You can't get rid of it. It's about reducing the risk. And that's the same as the public. And that's obviously what the government's trying to do with all its suggestions. But I totally agree with Iain. I think there's such big benefits to mental health issues and everything else by allowing people to watch sport. And, there's been lots of studies showing the benefits of sport for either participation or watching socially. That I think they have to weigh up that balance of risk. It is all risk assessment. And, Broadwood's full of kids. You go to Broadwood every night of the week, there's tons of youth teams, Clyde and the Colts, or, there's loads of people around the place. And those numbers would probably add up to sort of, relatively, small to medium attendances. And they're managing them now, and we've been managing them for months. So I do think it's possible. And I think that the Scottish Government, it would be great if they did realise that we're not all big clubs. Community clubs, they do a fantastic bit of work in the community. And I think that, to take that away from communities actually has quite a bit of impact as well. I'm sure in a Nigerian that would be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly that. I mean, we have, for example, up at one, the mental health programme that we have at Oakview. It was recognised by FIFA just a few months ago, and it's probably the first time that Stenhousemuir has been front page of the FIFA website.
Yeah, Albion Rovers were on their Twitter earlier in the day.
Right. Well, certainly, probably for us, it was a first, and it was about this mental health programme that it's a referral system, so it comes from the mental health nurses in the area, and it's men and women both who have had mental health or are undergoing mental health issues. And when FIFA came to do some filming of that for the website, a couple of the guys were speaking, and it was so interesting to hear what they had to say. These guys were saying, they're having some real mental health problems. A couple of them couldn't get past their front door. They'd go to their front door and just panic would overtake them, and they couldn't physically get through it. They couldn't get out of the house, but now they're part of this programme. It starts training at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're ready with their kit at 10 o'clock in the morning, itching to get out the door to come along and train and play. They're on minibuses going to Ravenscraig and to all over Scotland to play in tournaments. So that's had a huge impact. A couple of the guys said they do not know where they would be or if they would be here, because their mental health was so bad, but the programme has really been such an inspiration for them. So you've got to think about, when we're not running these programmes, when we're not allowed to run them, the impact that's having on people who actually need that community side of football. And I think for me, one of the most frustrating parts, and I understand the science and I'm completely behind it. I mean, I'm not critical at all of either government, Scottish or UK, for what they've had to deal with, because I wouldn't like to be making those decisions for something they've never had to face before. But I do think it's just a case of looking a little bit deeper sometimes, because at the moment, as it stands, on the Scottish Government's website and on the advice they're giving out, you can still have live events, outdoor live events for up to 200 people. That's still allowed right now under government guidance. The exceptions to that are football and rugby, because football and rugby is talking to Scottish Government under its own banner, if you like. So it puts up this strange anomaly where Cowdenbeath, as many of us know, are a ground that not only has football, but it has stock car racing in the ground as well. So on a Saturday morning, you could have 200 people in Cowdenbeath's ground sitting in the stand watching stock cars going round. But in the afternoon, when football players come out, suddenly it's too much of a risk to have 200 people sitting in the ground watching that. So I don't understand perhaps the science behind that aspect. I don't think it is scientists behind it. I think it's just a case of how they're administering the rules. And we're under the rules of perhaps thinking we're bigger clubs. So I think there's a few anomalies there that we just need to maybe talk to government about. And I think it's a case of dialogue with government. I don't think they're out to get football. I don't think they're out to get anybody. It's just a case of they're going as slowly as they feel they're able to go. They're being as cautious as they have to be. But we just got to talk to them a bit more and engage about what's right for our level.
I think that we can all appreciate that the virus cases and things like that in certain areas are rising rapidly. But as you say, it can't. These 200 people, I mean, some of those people might have went to the stock car racing in the morning and then came back for the game in the afternoon. So it's like, are they infectious in the morning, then COVID's gone in the afternoon? It's things like that, and I can see why it would probably perhaps be I mean, I can only imagine how frustrating that must be for Cowdenbeath, but even for you guys looking on, it must be frustrating.
Yeah, I think that one of the big frustrations throughout this have been the anomalies throughout everything. And as Iain said, I would hate to be in charge making these decisions, because it's a thankless task. And there's going to be anomalies thrown up, but I think it is about, pointing them out when they happen and saying that, if one thing is safe, then it should be safe at that level across the board. You can go through all these biosecure procedures at the football and then walk up the road and go to the supermarket, and somebody's walking the wrong way around the system, and it's just been accepted, or people not wearing masks, it's not being enforced. So I think in general, a lot of the issues are because people don't, some of the rules don't make sense, and I think when they do make sense, people are far more likely to adhere to them. So when they don't make sense, that people go, well, why should I bother? Because I don't have to do that somewhere else. So it would be good if the sport was looked at right across the board and had that level. Why have different rules for different sports. It doesn't make sense. Totally agree.
Yeah, I think that's been the big thing for me. Like, for example, I was in Coleraine for Mullow's Europa League qualifier. Now I flew over there on an EasyJet flight. There's about 200 to 250 people on my flight. I wanted to go to Israel for the game against Hapoel Beersheba. Same Jet2 flight, but only 50 Mullow players and directors, etc., were allowed on it due to social distancing and things like that. Now, they've all been tested. I would have had to have entered into the Mullow COVID bubble to go out to Israel, but government authorities, whoever making those decisions, deemed it not safe. I think that's where a lot of the frustration lies, is that it seems as if for football, even in wee simple things like that, there's just certain different rules that perhaps I can go over there as a journalist and I'm not infectious to 200 people who haven't been tested, but sitting next to 50 people who have been tested, I'm suddenly full of COVID.
You're right. You're spot on. That's the issues. And again, I don't want to be on the government's back, because it is difficult, and they appreciate themselves there are anomalies. But it's just when a couple creep up, and one the other day is, of course, that players aren't allowed to car share in going to training or going to games, and they've just been told that's just not to happen at all. But under the rules, they could go in a taxi. So a player could go in a taxi with a complete stranger driving the car, and that's okay. But he couldn't be driven by a friend wearing a mask. So it just seems it's a little bit one of those things that just hasn't been completely thought about all the implications of it. And it's finding ways that you have a rule, but you also look to see what would be the exceptions to that rule. Like, for example, when we were looking at the changing facilities, and we have gone for 2 meters in distance in every changing room, so between players. So it does mean we're down to 5 people in a dressing room, which when there used to be 20 in there, that you can just picture how much space there actually is in there. But we thought to start with, well, what if the players are in there wearing masks the whole time? If they were sitting in an indoor facility in a pub, for example, then that comes down away from 2 meters down to 1 meter. In fact, I think even in a pub, you can sit 1 meter without a mask on in a pub these days. But if we kept masks on players whilst they were in there for, say, the halftime chat or whatever, could they get more in there? But again, we couldn't do that. So I think there's just wee things like that which don't really seem to make a lot of sense. One other thing that came out was that you can't have fans into grounds, but on away days, when you're playing away from home, you could have supporters in your hospitality suites watching a live feed of the game in the hospitality suites. That's allowed because it's the same rules as hospitality rules like pubs. So you could have that on away games and your fans in your stadium, but you can't have them in there on the home games. So again, wee things like that which just need to be looked at as we navigate our way through this.
I don't know if you have paid particularly close attention to what's been going on down south, sort of step 7, step 8 down there. They've had the non-league crowds. Have had there was one on the telly, and it's got a great name. It's a team called #United, and they were on the telly, penalty shootout, and you see they won a penalty shootout in the FA Cup. Obviously, great moment for that club. I think they've only been around for 4 years. But you see behind the goal, there's at least 300, 400 fans celebrating on top of each other like it's last September. That, again, is I think the virus is slightly more contagious down south. Correct me if I'm wrong. But, again, how much more contagious is that virus down in Essex than it is up in Falkirk, Stenhousemuir, Clyde?
I think one of the problems with footage like that, though, is that you see it and the Scottish government see it, and then they panic and they think, oh, we can't have that. There's all this guidance about not celebrating goals, not spitting. We tell the players that, and they forget. There's human nature, and so people are going to celebrate. I was reading about the fact it was on your website. About the Motherwell fans celebrating outside the game when one of the goals went in. And they're all not socially distancing outside the game. I think the rules are. I get the rule at the moment where you shouldn't be going to people's houses. A lot of people don't think makes sense because you can go to a pub or you go to a restaurant. But a pub and a restaurant have the responsibility to have these rules in place and, monitor them Whereas when you go to somebody's house, nobody's actually given the job of actually putting these things in place. So I understand their thinking, but I think that's the reality is that if you're letting fans into the ground, it's actually easier to control them and remind them of the behaviour they're supposed to be demonstrating than if they congregate outside and there's no control over them. So we've got that same analogy, with sport and without sport. Again, it doesn't all make sense, and that's when it doesn't make sense, people don't comply.
Yeah, I think that's been the big thing. Obviously, looking at the Premiership as well, one of the big talking points more on the managers and the press and things like that we've been hearing from is that football is perhaps the safest environment for some players, and that, and granted, it will be slightly different at lower league level just with the testing requirements and stuff. But I think Malone manager Stephen Robinson saying that they test more than the NHS frontline staff do. So even with the lack of testing perhaps that will be apparent in the lower leagues, is football still, especially for fans, still one of the safer environments you can have opposed to going to a pub or a shop or things like that?
I think it's bound to be. I think right from the start, the government's been quite clear that outdoor events, anything outdoor, has a very significant lower risk than indoor. And it's just, I know there's some debate going on about how much is aerosol is affecting it, aerosol in the sense of the smallative droplets and how long they hang in the air. And there was talk about initially that it would only travel a certain distance and then it would drop to the ground. There's maybe some other schools of thought now that the virus is actually in smaller droplets that are holding up in the air a bit longer. But even with all these different bits of science that they're still looking at right now, because it is very much a brand new disease, even with all that in place, there's still a significant evidence that outdoor setting is completely different and the risks are way lower. So in the sense of that, whether it's the players on the pitch or whether it's fans sitting in the stand, the chances are hugely reduced to sitting in a home, in a restaurant, in a shopping centre, in a pub, doing your shops and grabbing a trolley, whatever. All those things, it's far reduced risk coming to a game of football. But I understand though that the government are trying to help people. They're trying to say, yeah, we understand there are risks in pubs and restaurants. Of course there are, but we're going to give you a break and we're going to let you have some customers in. Otherwise, you're going to get a business and people are going to lose their houses and mortgages and the mental health issues and all of that. So the government is trying to be reasonable and are accepting that there are some risks. So they're not for a minute saying there's no risks in pubs, but there's risks in football. I get that. But the analogy I heard the other day, which I thought was spot on, was that what they're doing to football is they're essentially saying, as if we were a pub, they're saying, right, open your pubs, you're allowed to open your pubs, you just can't have any customers. Well, how good would that be for a pub? Having all the staff there, cooking all the food, getting all the beer delivered, but you can't have any customers in. And it's a bit like that for football. Okay, you can get your game back, you can start playing again, you just can't have any fans in. And it's the fans that generate the revenue for clubs. So we're now faced with the position of so much of the costs going out, and a hugely significant part of the revenue is now not coming in. So it's a little bit of it's the one part of society that they haven't really given any, haven't relaxed any standards, I suppose, and haven't relaxed the sense of letting us have any customers back in yet. So it's the one they've still got to look at, and I just hope they will sooner rather than later.
It's really interesting that in the two football test events in Scotland, there wasn't a correlation to the stadium size and how many people they let in. And I wonder, obviously it was just a test and the first assessment, but, I think it's important that, when they do start going back to that they start looking at, it has to be specific to each club. As Iain said earlier, all of these rules and guidance have been given to clubs, and then the clubs have been left alone to sort of implement them and make it work for this. All the stadiums are stadium specific, and, so you have to fit it around your own setup. And obviously part of the process of getting every stadium inspected and getting through that SFA inspection is about checking that you've applied the rules properly and it's safe. So I don't think we should be too far away from hopefully letting a percentage number in, and each stadium will be specific. Each stadium will be, safe to their own requirements and what they actually have. So we're not asking for a blanket ruling, but I think some sort of relaxation would just be in everybody's interest. Just in the same way, Clyde also do mental health work with some of our groups. But we also are sponsored, all of the teams in North Lanarkshire, all are sponsored by suicide awareness. And, it's one of these things that people aren't talking about, but the numbers that are being affected by suicide in this lockdown are massive. And I think that clubs, the Scottish Government has to remember that clubs do an awful lot of good work in terms of health issues. Sport is health. And so, to encourage some sort of return, I think would certainly be, there'd be some benefits there.
Yeah, that's probably it. I'm not saying that Premiership clubs don't have their own community projects. Some of them have very well run community projects, but perhaps for lower league clubs, it is more at the heart of the community type stuff. And I know that's perhaps doesn't apply to anything. Like I know the Lanarkshire clubs, Mull and Hamilton, do loads in their community. I know Kilmarnock do a fair chunk as well. But especially for lower league clubs, when it is perhaps slightly more tight knit, those family type things, community run projects are really vital to the whole area, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot that goes on at clubs of all levels. That's right up to the clubs at the very top as well. A lot are doing great stuff, and even through the pandemic, did a lot of good work, and that was recognised. I mean, we took part in a Zoom call a week or so ago with a government minister to thank us for what we'd done and what others have done in the local area during the. We're still in it, but during the early days of the pandemic, and we continue to do that right now. We're still supporting, as we speak, we're still supporting 90 families in our local area who are still not going out and doing the shopping, still delivering 2-3 meals a week to them, which our club chef is in preparing every week, and we drop it off in our club vans with a couple of local businesses supporting us as well. So we're still doing all that work in the local community. But you're right, I think because it's a smaller environment in the sense of it's the same fans that are coming for the home side anyway, they're coming week in, week out. You do get to know them because of smaller numbers, and you build up a bit parts of our community, and then all the community teams that are in. I live locally, a number of the other board members live locally as well. So there's parents that are at school with my kids as well, their kids. So you do know a lot of people in your local area. So there's perhaps a little bit of a different community feel to it than there is at some of the bigger clubs. But the impact is the same. The impact is huge. Football is playing a huge role and has played a huge role right through the pandemic in the work that they've done to try and look after communities. And I'm sure, despite the challenges, and we're all going to have financial challenges because of this and because of not having fans at the moment, we're absolutely going to have financial challenges. But we've committed to continuing our community work and continuing to deliver those free meals to all the families we're supporting, because we see ourselves as a vital part of the community. And so that's not just us, that's dozens of clubs at all levels, not just in the SPFL, but at other levels below that as well. Lowland League, Highland League, West of Scotland, East of Scotland, lots of clubs doing fantastic work in their communities. They are the focal point for so much that happens in communities, that I hope government will look at that. And if there is funding available, if there is any kind of rescue packages, or if they are looking at what they can do, I hope they'll look at clubs at all levels and just recognise how important they are to the local communities.
I totally agree.
Yeah. On you go, David.
No, I was just saying I totally agree. I think no point in repeating what Iain said there. It's spot on. It's far more than football, and we all know that. We all know that here, but we've just got to make sure that the people making decisions realise that too.
You mentioned the financial implications of it, and we've all read the headlines over the last few months about Armageddon for Scottish football, potential doomsday, all these big scary words. But how is there much substance in these big words? I
think, obviously at one stage we were being asked to test 3 times a week, the same as the Premiership clubs. And that was going to cost us something in the region of 18,000 a month. That was unsustainable. we could not sustain that. We could probably sustain it for a few months, and then we just would be out of business. So the Armageddon issue is real. Speaking to other clubs and their position, we've got contracts that employment law issues in terms of we've got contracts with players that were signed when there was no pandemic, and they have to be honoured. Getting people into furlough is not something you can force. You have to get people to agree, and obviously the furlough scheme's finished. So I think that right across in every sector there's going to be difficulties, and financial is one of them, and football's no different. So do I think the Armageddon thing's real? I do. It's all about how long it lasts. I know that in England there's talk of support to clubs, and that's not been duplicated up here yet. So hopefully that there might be a change of heart, and maybe they see that the work that the clubs do and support that, and realise that if most clubs realise if you don't endear yourself to your community won't look after you, and vice versa. So now it's the other way around. If the government can't support the clubs, then there'll be a lot of good community work that would go with it.
I mean, I would echo that completely. I think that the financial position is quite bleak. Back in March, I know there were clubs who were getting towards the end of what they had in the bank, and that's now not uncommon, because it's kind of the way the season works in some ways. A lot of your sponsors will come in at the start of the season. You maybe get some of your bigger league payments right up front as well, and then you just use that as you go throughout the season. But also as you're bringing in revenue on match days, that's covering your costs as well. So all your gate receipts, all your hospitality that's coming in on those days, that keeps you going. So as you get towards the end of the season, you've got less in the bank. That's normal. And then we had, of course, just nothing from the middle of March. So all that money that was due to come in terms of the gate receipts and in terms of hospitality was no longer coming in, but we still had all the costs going out in terms of players' wages. Thankfully, as David mentioned, the furlough scheme came in, which was a godsend to us. We managed to get players put onto that. But then the situation we're in now, we've just taken players on. We've just started again, if you like, with contracts. So they're brand new contracts. So it's not the case we were in March where you wanted to get to the end of their contract period, just a few months away. They've just started, so we've got their contract obligations to meet. And those that were on perhaps 2-year, 3-year deals, then there really hasn't been much of a way of a negotiation in terms of reducing those. So we have got quite a lot of bills going out. We're now building up to getting all our staff back. And we have quite a big staffing complement because of the community programs that we run as well. So we've quite a number of staff. We've probably getting on, for, including the players, getting on for about 40 people on the payroll that comes through the club at Stenhousemuir. So it's a lot of people to pay for, and then your finance agreements for your pitch replacements and all the things that clubs have to do, all the ordinary stuff. That's all there, and it's all kicked back in because we're in pre-season, about to kick off again. And since March, we've had no fans, we've had no customers, nobody paying to come and see football. So come the first few games, we're going to be offering our full service, if you like, the games on the Saturdays. We're offering them for free, in essence. We should hopefully get the league payments continue to come through, but again, as we know, as you come down the divisions, the money is just not there, because 83% of the money that comes into Scottish football goes into the Premiership. So there's not a lot left by the time it filters its way down through the leagues to League One and League Two. So there isn't a lot of money coming into clubs. So that position of where we have to sustain all those costs going out for a significant period of time, who knows, it could even be for the whole season. I will be surprised if all clubs can afford to do that, and I'll be surprised if all clubs are still here at the end of it, to be honest.
I think as well that there's the pressure of not putting your hands up and saying, we're out. In the first division, automatic relegation to the second division if you can't complete your fixtures. That pressure of sort of not being the club that goes is really difficult. And I think we are all in the same boat. We're all just trying to do the best we can and make ends meet. But it's really hard, really difficult.
I'm assuming, because I know in the lower leagues and Scottish football in general, I suppose, even up to the Premiership level, the turnover of players at clubs can be quite substantial. How have you found that? I know you'll have your first team management, will pick the players and things like that, but at boardroom level, you'll need to work out the finances. So how have you managed to deal with that? Because you've probably not known your budgets all that for too long.
Yeah, I mean, it's been more of a challenge than previous years. I would definitely say that, but we've had to have some tough decisions and tough discussions with players, and we've had to look at different ways of structuring contracts. Players, I'll be honest, players have been quite good. Certainly ours, the ones we've spoken to, have been good at coming up with different ways on how we've structured their contracts, which includes different things for when we've perhaps not got fans in to what we'll be paying when we have got fans in. So we've had to work with players because they understood where we were, that since March there has been no money coming into clubs from any significant sources. So they know that if clubs are unable to play, and if we had taken a decision perhaps as an entire league, as League 2 or League 1 and 2, if we take a decision not to start, that's hundreds and hundreds of players who wouldn't have an income. And I think, again, it's one of the things that we need to impress upon decision makers sometimes, is that it's not just a bunch of guys tipping up to play football in a park on a Saturday afternoon. It is people's livelihoods. And yeah, it's a second income for if you like, part-time clubs. Guys will have other jobs, not all of them, but some guys will have other jobs. So it's a second income, but they go out and get their mortgage. They base their lifestyle, they base it all on what they earn from their two jobs and their two incomes. So to take one away, and in some cases it can be a good sum of money, to take that away from players would have been devastating. So as well as trying to keep our clubs going, which obviously has to be a huge part of what we're trying to do because of the history that's attached to clubs. When you've been around for 130 odd years or whatever it might be, I very much feel you're just a custodian trying to keep that club's history alive and trying to keep going. You're just in the seat for a while, trying to do your best for the club and for the area and for its history. But there's also the human side to it. I did hear some journalists the other day talk about, well, it could be quite straightforward. Clubs could just mothball. I'm thinking that's going in, on the Monday and telling everybody from the kit man, the grounds people, the chief exec, the physiotherapist, as well as all the players, that's telling them that they're out of a job. And yeah, we'll come back to you in a year or 9 months, and if you're still around, we'll pay you then. That's devastating for people. And then all the other things attached to football, such as it's the local butchers often that's supplying the pies for your pie hut, and local providers and security firms, and all the things that just feed into the game. It's huge. So I think the mothball was always going to be a difficult decision for clubs to make, but the authorities, I don't think, made it particularly easy for us. It was a case of if you decide to go, if you decide to keep playing football, but 2 or 3 clubs don't want to play football, then you're going to be subject to disciplinary proceedings because you've all already previously committed to. And for League 2, certainly, you could find yourself in a playoff for dropping out of a professional game if the London Highland League are still playing. Now, how you could play that playoff if you've decided not to play football, so you haven't got a squad, I don't know. So again, it kind of forced the hand of everybody to play. So the only option now is for clubs to play. Therefore, what can only happen next is clubs will run themselves to the point when they have no money left. And at that point, it's receivership for clubs, which would be absolutely awful because we don't want to lose anybody for this. We've done so well to get clubs through this. We've done so well to keep it going and keep players getting an income as much as we possibly could, keep staff in jobs and all of that. So to fall at a hurdle now would be devastating if we lost any clubs.
I totally agree. And I think when you look back at history repeats itself. If you look at, Scottish football and the national team, a lot of people went back to the teachers' strike years and years ago as to when they stopped taking kids' teams at schools, that had a knock-on effect many years later to the national team and the level of players that were coming through. And we don't want COVID to be the catalyst for 10 years' time where, we know the players that have come from the smaller clubs and are playing in the Scottish team just now. So they could be existing. They could be at Stenhousemuir or Clyde. And, if these clubs don't survive and don't, manage to keep the game going, you're going to have a knock-on effect in years to come, because some of these kids could give up football. And we all know, the progression of young players, it's important that we keep that level up. Clyde have taken on a few players from a couple of other clubs. I don't know if you have or not, Iain. But these Premier League clubs are investing their futures with us and bringing them on to the next level. That's got to be looked after as well. All the clubs have to survive. That's the most important thing.
It's a good point though about the youth side of things, because that's one of the simplest budgets you can cut. If you want to keep your first team going, because you have to be competitive, because nobody wants to be relegated or see yourself out of the division. So the simplest thing you can do is cut your reserve team, cut your youth budget, and that's devastating for the future of the game, because you're right what you say. It just takes that one thing to happen. So I worked alongside Gordon from Clyde. I put some ideas to him, and he framed up one of the motions that went into the league to increase the number of loans that we could take this season. Because of that, because we wanted to try and make sure that if there were clubs that were keeping players on in the Premiership, young players, then we could maybe get access to more of them to give them game time on a Saturday, because if they're not playing a reserve league, then those youngsters got to get playing. So we wanted to increase the number of loans so that it could come to lower league clubs to keep them playing football and try and keep that alive a little bit. So it was of benefit to the clubs in the Premiership, but it was also of benefit to clubs in the lower leagues as well. And that's a good example of how I think clubs in the different levels and different divisions in the game could be working closer together on things like talent development going forward. But the last thing we want to do is to make those cuts at that youth level, and then 10 years time, whoever it might be, we've got a missing generation again when it comes to the national squad.
One thing I was wondering, just in terms of that missing generation, I think that perhaps applies to fans as well. Say, for example, you don't get fans in for 6 months, and I know I started going to the football when my local team started handing out free tickets to the schools, and my dad took me along when I was 6 or 7. You risk losing that generation as well. Perhaps that 6 or 7-year-old that they came to Auckleview or Broadwood this season, and then they miss out going, and then maybe just go and see Celtic or Rangers on the telly every weekend, go and watch them. Now, not saying you shouldn't go and support Celtic and Rangers. You can do that if you want, but perhaps they miss being a Clyde fan or miss being a Stenhousemuir fan.
Absolutely. Going to football is a habit, and if people lose that habit for whatever reason, it's hard to get it back again. Now, obviously, COVID's an exception. Every habit that people had, has stopped for a period of time. But we want to get people back as soon as we can. Safety is the priority. We'll have to, remember that. But as long as we can do it safely, and I think we can demonstrate we can, then I think, allowing us to get back to some sort of routine and progress would certainly be beneficial.
Well, guys, thanks for joining me in this call. I suppose just to close it, we'll obviously hope all clubs make it to the end of the season and everybody can make it through somewhat okay. But given the way things are shaping up with the virus and the sort of messages that have been coming out from different places, is it possible for clubs at lower league level especially to make it through the 2020-21 season without government intervention?
I think it's possible. It is possible. It's hard to put all clubs together into the same bag, if you like. Some clubs will be better funded than others, and that's no fault of theirs. It just could have been the particular point of the year when this whole thing has hit, and their ability to be able to raise funds, or whether they've got somebody attached to a club who maybe puts money in themselves, and all these sorts of issues that are there. So it's hard to say for all clubs, but I think it's going to be really, really hard for clubs to get through this. If we don't have to test, if we don't have to routinely test players every week, that will help. That's a huge cost that we don't have at the moment. Not having fans in is the second most difficult part. So if we can deal with that I think we'd certainly see probably most clubs, if not all clubs, surviving to the end of the season. But my fear is that as we don't have fans in for some time potentially, and as this virus continues at the level it's at until potentially the spring, if not even further than that, my fear is that we will lose clubs in the professional leagues and in the leagues below as well. So I'm concerned about the future. I'm usually an optimist, but I'm concerned about all clubs surviving, which to me would be a grave thing to come out of this.
Yeah, I know, speaking to officials of Lowland League clubs, non-league clubs, just in our sort of pre-season friendlies, there's no guarantee of their leagues even starting or having a start date. And speaking to a couple of their chairmen, there's a genuine concern that if their season doesn't start, some of those clubs could go to the wall. I think it's odds. The longer it continues, the less likelihood that 100% of us will survive. And every, as Iain said, every club's different. The structures are different. The clubs that require more hospitality income are going to be hurt the worst, because they're just not going to get that. Some clubs have benefactors that support, and therefore they'll maybe survive, but everybody's being affected right across the board. So as I say, the sooner we can return to something, the streaming deals have helped, the Pixelot deals, and actually being able to let the fans see the games from home. But it's not the same as being at the games. Your website has stated that it's got an effect on the tempo of games and the pace of games. You're just watching the stuff on telly. It's not the same. So let's hope that we get back to some sort of normality, and it makes the likelihood of somebody going to the wall less likely.